time. Really appreciate taking 45 minutes of your extremely valuable time. And with that, let's kick it off. My name is Val. I'm the founder and CEO of ExecWeb. We're a very exclusive cybersecurity executive network. And we do something very simple, but very important. Our mission is to fix what we feel it's a broken and inefficient collaboration between security practitioners and cybersecurity vendors. And we do that by facilitating very authentic and genuine one-on-one virtual meetings. Today's topic actually is very interesting, and I think it's going to be very, very important to our mission here, which is for people to understand, for all the professionals in the cybersecurity ecosystem to understand, so to speak, the secrets behind enterprise cybersecurity vendor onboarding. And I speak to vendors all the time, as you can imagine, from many different countries, including the US, Canada, UK, and Israel. And most definitely, I do feel that there is a bit of a gap there when it comes to actually understanding what it takes for a cybersecurity vendor to be onboarded, especially in large enterprises. And with that in mind, we asked these great ambassadors of ours, all representing big companies, to give us 40 minutes of their time and immensely valuable insights to give us the inside secrets, so to speak, of what it takes to onboard a cybersecurity vendor into their organizations, and how they manage risk management along with business goals, the criteria that they use to evaluate cybersecurity vendors when it comes to product functionality, scalability, compliance, maturity of the product and the company. Also, the vendor onboarding process itself, who are the key players and the main processes within the big organizations. I think it's very important for us to pull the curtains so that people understand the reality of what's going on and have more realistic expectations as we try to form more and more of these mutually beneficial relationships. And the last point that is going to be discussed is the best practices for cybersecurity vendors looking to work with any of you or all of you, and and how they should approach you, and tips in building strong relationships with key stakeholders, tailoring to your approach, and how to fit the specific needs of different organizations they would like to partner with. With that, I would love each one of you to introduce yourselves, and we can start with Ken Foster, who's going to obviously moderate this webinar. And Ken is the VP of IT, Governance, Risk, and Compliance at FleetCor. And then he's going to introduce the rest of the panelists here, but they're all very great ambassadors of ExecWeb, and I'm privileged to have them here today. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, Ken.
Thank you, Val, for facilitating this, and thank you for the rest of the panel for joining. What I'd like for you to do is I'm gonna start with Bradley, since I'm gonna start with you. Introduce yourself, your role, and a little bit about the size of your company, and then the first question I'd like to answer at the beginning of this is, do you have a formalized procurement department for cybersecurity purchases going forward? So Bradley, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently Vice President, Chief Information Security Officer at Paychex. Paychex is the second largest payroll and human capital management software and services company. We have about 17,000 employees, about 2,200 just in IT alone. And we have a procurement function within IT, an IT procurement function.
All right, thank you, Bradley. David, you're next.
Hi, David Cross. I'm a Senior Vice President and CISO for the Oracle SaaS Cloud, so basically the cloud application environment. So we look at things, and one thing I always like to start with is always thinking about onboarding anything. It's just like onboarding something inside your company. Have you done an architectural review? Have you done an audit and compliance review of it? And I think that's a teaser, I think, of this exact topic.
Okay, thank you. Rick?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rick Doughton. I'm VP of Information Security and Fractional CISO, and here at Centene Corporation, and Fractional CISO in charge of all of our health plans, subsidiaries, and international. Centene's a Fortune 25 company that you probably never heard of, but we're an enormous healthcare organization. And yes, we have procurement within IT. We have 90,000 employees, well, in the core company, and then another 30,000 in subsidiaries around the world.
All right. Steve.
Hi, everybody. Steve Zalewski, former CISO Levi Strauss, which is a $6 billion gene manufacturer. And I can definitely attest to the fact that we had formal procurement processes that we had to follow.
All right, and Victoria.
I'm from the exec website, so we'll just I just joined to listen to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, I just saw you jump on the screen there, so figured you'd introduce yourself. So, all right. So, I think a good way to look at it is you saw large companies, everybody has some formal procurement process. I think it's interesting, and again, same with me, right? And we're about 15,000 employees, and we have a formal procurement process inside IT and security, or into where security falls. So, and it's interesting to see that across the board, that not everybody follows that procurement process across all of the functions of the company, but they definitely do inside the IT and the security side of the world, right? So, roughly how long, and I'm going to ask the panel, let everybody have a chance to put in on this. Roughly how much effort does it go in to onboard a new vendor? And I think one key thing to that is does that matter whether you're buying or whether you're doing a POC? Does that change the process? So, Steve, I'm going to let you kick us off.
Okay, so representing Levi's, if no money crosses hands for a POC or whatever, then we can bring a company in relatively quickly, because what we're really doing is simply signing the NDA. And so oftentimes when we would start, that's where we'd start from. Doing a POC, just do the NDA, make sure both sides are good. Let's get the technology and let's go play with it. Okay. As soon as we then started to talk about money, then the formal process kicked in. And what I would say is you can expect anywhere from 3 months to 9 months to be able to get through that process, depending upon the skillfulness that I had in negotiating with my procurement business and the need for the potential vendor to get their red lines into my paperwork. Because as the biggest, as a big vendor, it's my paperwork that's going to win. If you're a smaller vendor and you're trying to put red lines in and I have to go to my legal team or work with my procurement team, I used to tell them, if you can accept what I'm offering, it will save you anywhere from 2 to 4 months in the procurement process, because that's the length of time I have to wait for legal. So you take it out of my control to be able to close the process, and you put it in the hands of neither me nor you. And that's the worst possible place. So part of it is just a conversation with them, understanding where to pick their battles.
Okay. David?
Yeah, I'd like to build upon Steve's points a little bit. I think there's two things of the POC, versus full. I like to think of it as about, are you in production or not, right? There's an element, are you in a test environment and like looking at something versus are you in a production environment? And I think that's a big element that should be, thought of how fast you can go. And also like to build upon the point of what's the average time for a new vendor or new, product or service is. I think it's also in that 3 to 6 month time frame as well, because the overall taking a bigger look at things, look at the architecture, the compliance. And I think that 3 months would be overly optimistic, but 6 months is probably the average.
All right. Rick?
So it's the same for either one. So absolutely agree with Steve, absolutely agree with David. And so regardless of if it's going to be a POC or we're buying it, we still need to go through a service design, which still need to define the budget, which includes human FTEs doing things, even if we're not paying outside for it, and involves a timeline and project manager assigned. And that goes to a steering committee at the end of the quarter, where we then approve as it comes up, is like, yep, let's go ahead. We agree with all this. And it kind of goes forward. So totally agree with Steve in that, like, it all depends on who has the most lawyers, right? we're the size where it's only like, Amazon and Microsoft and some of the people who are bigger than us that we don't get to say, then it's in that standpoint. But mostly everyone else is smaller. And so the when coming to implementation, it could be, I've had times where it took a year just to get a POC installed, depending on how many groups have to be engaged, because even though the challenge in a very, very big company is everyone is siloed. And so if you bring on a technology, they'll say, well, why I'm not using that, this other person's using it. Well, we're using it too. So 5 people are using it. No one wants to pay for it. So then there's the whole thing of who's going to pay for it. And then if it's like, have we already allocated the budget, or do you need to wait a year for that to happen? So there's a lot of variables involved. And that's where I make sure I'm upfront with all the vendors. Is pack a lunch. You may have to talk to lots of people. It may take a lot longer. And B, sometimes we're going to go dark for a while. Like Steve says, like it's going to go into some hole where legal or procurement or something needs an approval, and it may go for months, and then it'll pop up, and then it'll be a rush to kind of get it finished up. That's the reality.
Okay. All right. Bradley, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of agree with points of all of the above. So all of this is true in my organization as well. Everything that's been said, it does depend on if the POC does not essentially have to interface with production systems and sensitive data. We can get it through a lot faster than if it doesn't. And there's the timeline associated with the procurement process varies vastly depending on the interaction with that vendor, and again, how much the contract is marked up, how quickly they get through our vendor security review as well. That's highly variable, and it depends on, again, what access they have, what data they may possess or have access to. All of that can make it, something can fly through in a few weeks, or it could take months, depending on all of those variables. But I think that Rick started to hit on what's more important in our organization, which is the internal alignment size. Yeah, we have 2,200 folks in our IT department. There is no security product that we've ever installed in a vacuum with just security. We've had to align resources across multiple teams, and that piece the vendor has zero control over. And it can take a while to get all those parties to allocate resources to the project and be lined up and ready to go with you.
Great. And I think you guys, I want to pull on that thread just a little bit of the POC thing. And the alignment piece is great. It's a great point, because I don't think that's appreciated enough on how much interaction that has to happen, because very few of us as security people have the permission to go install whatever we need to install on the machine, or open, so I think the change management process is underappreciated in this. And I've often said that I have to do the same thing for a POC as if I bought it and was put it in production from a change management standpoint. So, and I think that's something that gets missed a little bit in the conversation. So on the POCs, great points about either non-production or production. For me, it's still a security risk that's been put into our environment. So I'm still going to treat it like it's going to possibly have access to production. So we're going to follow those same processes, right? Another question that something you guys brought up that made me think of this, and I was going to save this one, but do you, because of those procurement processes and the cross functionality and how long it can take to onboard a new vendor, how many of you force everything through a preferred reseller to cut that down?
It depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes it helps, and sometimes it doesn't matter. If the longest pole in the tent is, like Bradley said, it's like getting, the IT group to make sure that we can spin up a system, apply, get credentials developed, open up ports, get a server design put together, then it may not matter. But yes, to sometimes.
Anybody else want to weigh in on the preferred vendor? David, you look like that tripped something for you. So
It did, yeah. So I always write the notes. I think I like Rick. It's like it depends, but let me give you an example. Is I think sometimes when you're going to a new specialized area, or there's a new vendor, new technology that you may not have any experience with, your team may not have experience with it, and you made a little time help with deployment or implementation, and that's sometimes going through a preferred vendor is where then you may need additional professional services sometimes or system integration for that specialty area, and that's sometimes an optimum choice.
So
Steve?
what I will say is more and more, it's becoming a strategy to have a VAR or somebody who can be the single point of passing paper, because no company has enough lawyers and procurement people to do all this. So to the degree that you can have a single point to close a deal, definitely is a standard, I would say, tactic, and actually becoming a strategy for most of us. And so oftentimes, if you're a vendor going to purchase to us, one of the first questions you should be asking is understanding the procurement process, and do we have preferred vendors to work with, so that I might send them to you, because it's going to be a lot faster for you to do the paperwork with them, because I've done the hard paperwork up front. Okay. Do not underestimate the value of that more and more now, even starting at POC level, because again, the NDAs and everything else are already signed. So you've really made it easy to get to the functional component, not the non-functional precursors. And then the second thing I'll share there is deal size, right? Be very cognizant that like at Levi's, if I was doing a deal under 250K, I didn't have to go through procurement or legal. I was able to just let it flow. They would just pre-approve through our ERP systems at that level. So same thing, ask what those might look like, because you're going to want to maximize the value of the deal. But oftentimes, if you can shave 3 or 4 months off of a deal by giving up 20 grand on the deal, that's a win-win. And so realize where our ability is to, in essence, get under the radar screen and how we put that deal together. So those two things on the VAR perspective.
So here I would like to just jump in for a second. We have an open question, which I think is a very great question, and one that I'm sure many vendors out there would like to have the answer to. And I would appreciate everyone's feedback on that. But the question, as you can see, is what can vendors do proactively to make it easier for you or your teams to make the process as fast and smooth as possible? I think we lost him for a second, but David, why don't you? Go ahead, Rick. Why don't you guys
I would say come in at the right level, because everyone thinks that they need to come in to, and again, first I want to make the statement of like, there's the Fortune 500, what we represent, and then 5 million other organizations, and understanding that it's different in a larger organization, that it's like, hey, it's a 20-minute implementation. All you need is a service account and spin up a SaaS, and here it is. Like, no, all the things we said define why that may take 6 months, though technically it may take 5 minutes to actually do it. But also, everyone thinks they want to go talk to the CISO or the highest level person. Like in a very large company, it's like I tell vendors myself that getting me on board as an advocate doesn't help you, because I'm part of the committee at the end of the quarter that will give a thumbs up and thumbs down when they come to say, to the steer code to say, okay, we have this, here's a service defined, here's budget, what do you guys think? We ask questions and 3 or 4 people give a thumbs up or thumbs down. So it's like going under the person who actually is going to be using it, because they're going to advocate for it, because they think this like, oh, well, you like it, well, you're in charge and it's your budget, go ahead and put it in. And be like, that's not how it works. So understanding and asking the question, like, who is the one who's going to be the real person using it, that is going to be the one who needs to be, sold off. Because if I like it, I give it, all I do is, hey, I'm going to pass it to the people who are actually going to do it. And if they like it or not, then they'll move forward.
I could build on something as well. Another angle to it is, I agree with everything that Rick says. but there's also element is there's other stakeholders sometimes that whether it's compliance or audit, there's corporate architecture things, and they may have lots of questions. And the way to really the best recommendation I can make to ease things is having lots of documentation, because there will be lots of questions, but you want to go back and forth of like, hey, are you using this protocol, or oh, have you completed this audit? When you have that package of documentation that answers all the questions proactively, it makes onboarding and decision making quite easy.
Would agree with all that. I'd also recommend taking some time to actually learn what the process is. I think that a lot of vendors don't take the time to do that, and then they're surprised at all these phases. And I'm like, I could have walked you through the whole process at the beginning, and you would have understood what you were going to go through.
Yeah, and case in point there would be, we talk about POC. Just because we're doing a POC, that does not mean that we're doing a POC with an expectation to roll that into a buy, okay, immediately. Oftentimes, we're doing a POC and we're planning for next year's budget. What we're really trying to do is validate that this is what we want to do in next year's budget and understand the cost, the business process friction, all the work that we have to do to put our reputation on the line, that this is a capability that we want to bring forward. And many vendors think once they're in POC, it's hurry up and buy. And they don't understand that the procurement process actually oftentimes is actually way quicker than the CISO's procurement process of getting all of the alignment that he needs before he's putting his reputation on the line. And the fact that he's also looking to see that your reputation is going on the line as well.
That's great. And we have Ken back.
Yes, sir, guys. I lost internet.
No worries.
So-
No worries. Yeah, so we just answered the question that somebody posted, actually, Brandon Hall posted on the chat, which was just answered, Ken, on how can the vendors make it easier for you guys to onboard them and to make the process smooth and effective. So that was kind of covered. So I think one next topic that might make sense to go into, if you don't mind, is what are the criteria used to evaluate vendors when it comes to the product functionalities, scalability, and compliance, and how that impacts onboarding process itself? So Ken, why don't you go ahead and jump in here and take over again as the moderator?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point. And I had a question I wanted to ask around the difference between a well-established manufacturer or vendor and a startup, new emerging technology, and what that does to this procurement and onboarding process, right? Because I think you guys covered it pretty well on the challenge of just what the overall onboarding process is. It's a procurement review, a legal review, technology review is part of that onboarding process, which you probably have done that technology piece before you've decided that. But does it change if you're using an established, well-known vendor, big vendor, Microsoft, Azure, AWS, somebody like that, or are you looking at one of the new emerging technologies that are coming out there? What does that do to the process? And Bradley, why don't you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, sure. So part of our vendor risk management process is looking at vendor viability. And I'd say that's one place where, a startup or a smaller vendor will have a little larger lift to get through that process, because we're looking at it in terms of, do they have the financial wherewithal to be there for us when we need support a year from now or 3 years from now. So there's, obviously, if you're working with one of the major cybersecurity companies, that's probably not going to be an issue. Publicly traded, you can review the finances, they've got plenty of cash. Those are not issues. With a startup, there's almost no data, right, for us to review. So it's a little bigger uplift at that point for those smaller entities.
Rick?
Yeah, because agreed, and because the risk assessment's different, right? And it's not that A, are they going to still be around, or are they not going to be viable? B, are they going to scale with us? We don't want to be their biggest customer, and they're practicing stuff on us. But depending on what it is, it might be something that isn't like mission critical, that is a nuanced thing that could be helpful. So it always is, it depends. And three, what is the risk of them being acquired? Because there are certain very, very large, particularly systems integrators, that would not contract with, and if they get bought by one of those, then I'm sorry, you no longer can play. And so those are things that part of the process is still the same, but the risk assessment, kind of like what Bradley's saying, will be very thorough. And it might go to things like, we want you to put your source code in escrow, so in case something goes wrong, then at least we know that we can like recover or transfer it to something else if it's something like that. But yeah, it's a good question.
David?
Not too much more to add. I think everyone's covered it pretty well. And I think as a couple of people called out, there's a difference between, you're taking on a vendor that's a 10 or $20 billion company, or something that is a early stage startup, right? And I think this is sometimes where third party assessment tools and things, I won't mention some, there are certainly a bunch out there, but that can help of evaluating these smaller companies that are unknowns, right? They may not even done a SOC or audit or other types of things yet. But there's other times, I'll say that you're going to be engaging with a $10 billion company, is right. Do they need to perform these different types of risk assessments? They're much more known and much more have much more documentation, and so I think the process is a bit different.
Yeah, Steve.
I'm going to take a slightly different perspective just to round it out here, right? Which is, everybody has said the right thing. Now, when I was at Levi's, I was in retail. Money is tight in retail. Okay. We squeeze 2 pennies until they scream. And even though we're a Fortune 500, very difficult to find money. So oftentimes we looked at young companies because they were more cost effective. They were maybe more risky, but I was looking for good enough for the cost that I could get, okay, for the fee, so I could stretch my dollars further. So don't underestimate, if you're a vendor, right, to be able to realize that your size is both a strength and a weakness depending upon who you're talking to. So have that conversation and be able to price accordingly to the risk. And then the second thing is, oftentimes we use the young ones because what we were trying to do, right, is do something different. We're reaching earlier into the ecosystem of capability because we were realizing that we weren't going to do it the standard way because it was just too long and too expensive. So let's try something different. In which case, again, the fact that you wouldn't scale to a full Fortune 500, we're okay with that, right? We're like, look, we're only going to do this much, but we're pushing it this way because we can't do it the other ways, or we've got a unique case, so that you're being brought in to play to your strengths, to the size of your company and the maturity of your company, not that it's a giant detriment because you're coming into a Fortune 50 company with 50,000 people and you have to be perfect out of the gate. So look at both sides of that equation, both as a vendor and we do as CISOs.
Yeah, I want to expand on that. That's a great point, Steve. When I was a CISO 10 years ago to a mid-sized company, I loved having startups because the other thing is you get to participate, influence their pipeline. And so it becomes your product because they customize it to it. So there are times where even us at our size, we're lighthouse customers for some new things, knowing that it's not like a managed service that we're relying heavily on, but a certain nuanced thing that's helping us in some way. And then we can influence the pipeline as the other advantage to it, if you have a mature, forward-thinking organization.
So I think you all brought up something that was interesting. Every one of you mentioned your third-party risk management program and the filling out of that questionnaire and being prepared to answer questions. So I want to throw in here that I think one of the biggest things I can see in these smaller emerging companies, fairly new, even if they're not early stage startups, even if they're second round, third round startups, be prepared to answer whether you have a SOC 2, why you don't have a SOC 2, why you didn't think it was important, what are these security questions, and then the funding thing comes up in these early stages. What is your funding plan? What is your exit strategy? I think those are all important things that they need to be able to answer and be willing to be transparent as they can be upfront, because it helps us get through that risk questionnaire, and our third-party risk questionnaire is coming up, right? Because we can't get everything we need from those services that provide us. They're giving us some scan data and other thing, but we can't get some of that financial information that we really need to understand what your exit strategy is. Right. So I think that's super important thing to bring up out of that last conversation was that third party risk piece that we're all going to put you through. So just be ready. So
Ken, let's expand on that a little bit more to support the vendors. Okay. And this is, I want what you guys think. Again, coming from a large company and advising a lot of young ones. Just because you don't have a SOC 2 Type 2 yet, because you're small, right? It's not a detriment. If you're talking to me at Levi's and you're young and I'm bringing you in because you're out 18 months and you've got MVP, right? Minimum viable product, you got product market fit, and I want to do this, okay? And I bring you in and I'm going to hit a vendor assessment. And odds are you're going to look really bad in that vendor assessment because you're not a senior mature vendor. But it's okay to often say, look, what we're planning to do is get a SOC 2 Type 2. And we will commit to completing that within a year of signing contract. And so therefore, what you're doing is you're balancing the growth that you're going through with the maturity you need to demonstrate. And oftentimes for me then, for Levi's, it's good enough that I know that you'll have it within the year, that you have good controls, but you haven't gone through the process yet. So don't be afraid to be transparent upfront where you are, because it's not necessarily a negative. And when you start to hide things, that really violates the trust that we're looking for. So please be transparent upfront. 9 times out of 10, we want to lean in with you and we'll find a way to make it work, not use it as an anvil to prevent it from working.
Couldn't said it better, Steve. That's a great point. Anybody else have anything else to add on that? So the other thing I heard, and I wanted to pull on that thread, we were all talking about these early stage startups, and you and Rick, I believe you said it, we don't want to be your sandbox, right? But how many of you, or what do you think the appetite is at a certain point, and depending on what it is, I agree with this, where you may be interested in that design partnership as a money savings, cost savings opportunity for what we're trying to do? And what is the appetite for you maybe in certain areas to take on that design partnership with that new earlier stage company and help them figure out some things about their product? Rick, I'm gonna let you go first on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I talk to more vendors than anybody, and I'm on advisory boards of some of them, and it really depends, like I said, there's Fortune 500 and 5 million other companies. So they're trying to keep saying that over and over again, that this is a 0.00001% of all the people out there. But that depends on the team and the type of tool. Like if it's some like instant response tool or some forensics thing or something in application security, there's nothing that's like part of the operational thing, then yes, would love to get in it, play with it, kick the tires, help them design it as it's going along and provide feedback to it, as opposed that it's something like, I'll just use a very easy example, like a new EDR. It's like we have compliance requirements for it. We have a lot of stuff it's going to integrate with. We got a lot of stuff that's feeding into it and a process that supports it. And coming in and trying to map it to that is probably not going to work. But something that might be a tool that's in a niche place might be something that even large companies like mine would be able to get into. And so the answer is always it depends. And it also depends on which group is, like I said, forward thinking. There are some groups that are very conservative, and it's like, this is what we do, this is the way we do it, we get these big vendors, we do this thing, we have this process, we don't change it. And others that are like, let's try new things, it's always trying to improve. And even within the same organization, within the same security team, you may have different perspectives. So it's always possible. But that's where kind of go back, I remember who said it, is like, know your audience. Do you know that this is a person who is not really out there that much, not speaking at events, not really doing much, but is very good at what they do and is very consistent? Or someone who's always out speaking, always like a thought leader, doing papers, on stuff like this, who's always looking to try to be better? That may be someone that would be more apt to be able to do that.
Ken,
All right. Anybody else got anything on that?
yeah, Ken, I kind of spurred another thought that I think is important to share. Is sometimes, let's say, especially large organizations, that you look at a given solution or vendor and saying, well, they have a CAN dashboard, they have a set of capabilities, and it doesn't necessarily have the flexibility, right, that you may want, that may be needed in your environment. You may have a very, very complex environment. And sometimes the smaller vendors and the startups, right, they're much more flexible. They're very interested in being able to be customized, to your environment and to work in your environment. And that could be a major advantage where other ones like, I don't want your UX dashboard. It's not going to scale to my environment. But, oh, if you only had an API, then I could tie in or integrate my solution into it. And that's a major advantage sometimes that not everyone may realize.
Yeah. Anybody else got anything on that topic right there? If not, we've got a question that came in from the audience that I'd like us to, I think we've kind of talked about it.
I just had one point before we moved off that point.
Okay.
It also depends, and a lot of Fortune 500 companies have innovation centers or innovation labs where they have people dedicated to doing exactly that, design partnerships and playing around with things. And then there are a lot of Fortune 500 companies that don't have that. And it's a lot more challenging if there is not an innovation lab or innovation center, because in that case, you're still going to have to get resources dedicated to work on it. And when you don't have like a clear business case established, you just want to play around, it's really hard to get those resources.
Yeah, that feeds into Steve's point about like, hey, we got it in the lab and we're playing with it. Doesn't mean we're going to be buying it soon. It's like we're kind of, either testing it out as another thing, and it might be something that's down the road. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you guys just pulled on something else I want to talk about, and maybe we'll get to the question in a minute because it goes on this. Speaking of innovation labs, does it make the decision easier? Because not everybody has an innovation lab. Very few companies that I know personally have that, right? Because it's a budget item. Would you prefer that they get partnered with some of these resellers who set up innovation labs and sandboxes for you to get in and play with their technology and get your team comfortable with it? Is that a preferred method, or would you rather have it live in your environment? So I guess that's the question. The answer there is, if there's an innovation lab available to you that's provided by a third party, like a reseller that's got your team use, will that give you value compared to you having it in your own environment?
Yeah, I'll just say no. Easy answer.
Okay, easy answer. All right. Bradley, same.
I was going to say better than nothing, but but without the unique elements of your environment, it doesn't hold a lot of water.
All right. Same answer, Steve, or?
So I want to take a slightly different angle to this again. So what I'm trying to do for the vendors is give you as much perspective, okay? And one of the things you need to understand is the way that we procure products, procurement process, everything else, interesting, but the way CISOs are doing the selection has changed, right? We have 4,000 of you trying to sell to us. More and more, we're not going through traditional POCs, picking 5. More and more, it's relationships we have with our peers. And we're saying, hey, I need to put a UBA out there. Who's put something out there recently? And within our networks, I'll go, hey, these are the 2 that we've had good success with. And all of a sudden you get a call and you're in the final 2 and you didn't even know. Okay. Yeah. So that also speaks to the knowing that this is how the procurement process and decision-making is changing at the CISO level, because there's so many of you. Just because you're young, if your reputation precedes you that it's a good solution, and Bradley says, hey, Steve, I've got a UBA, it's a young company, I've had good success with it, I may be acceptable with having it actually know that it's running in Bradley's environment. And now I'm doing just kind of a cursory check through with my team to be able to know it's the right one for us, not the full-blown POC where I need it on site. So it may be fine that I'm using a third party that has it up because I've already pre-qualified you. And that goes for big and small companies and everything, so that you need to realize now that trust relationship you're building with us, you better realize every day trust is everything now.
So I think you just answered one of the questions that came in the chat, was how much is brand recognition important? And I think the way to answer that is that exactly what you said, Steve. I am going to trust one of you or somebody else in my network and what their experience has been more than I'm going to trust the Gartner report, more than I'm going to trust Forrester. I'm going to trust real world experience on people that I know in my network. And I think that trust in that, so it can go both ways. The brand rec, it doesn't matter how much accolades you've got. If you've got a bad reputation within our community and our network, it doesn't matter how good your product is, right? It's gotten a bad taste in our mouths. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Steve, and it is about our network, and that it's kind of like the the pretty woman examples, like don't judge a book that walks into your store and because they're not dressed in nice clothes aren't going to buy something, because that person in the small company that is trying you out and may not have the budget for it may have friends in big companies that they say, wow, this is the greatest thing, I can't afford it, but you guys probably can, and that might be the thing that gets it over the edge. And then secondly, that relationship is so important. I mean, yeah, Gartner, I kind of cringe when you say Gartner's like, who's looking at that? I mean, that's no value to me whatsoever. It is really about like real world examples and people who are using it, or people who look at these things, who are played with it and other things that are out there. So and if anything else, just because you came and you say you're one big brand that, I'm trying to pick one that doesn't exist anymore, so I don't pick on anybody. Of something who got bought that doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, just some big brand that everybody knows the name of, the Parky Games, like that means nothing to me, that the quality or whether it's right for my business, because I'm not buying the name, I'm buying the tool and the people who are supporting it for me.
I'd like to jump in for a second. I have a slight disagreement with some about, like Gartner and Forrester and others, but actually I like to take a combination, right? And really it's the trifecta. One is you do want to look at some of the, Gartner, Forrester, the other analysts, like they provide a perspective, right? And that's one, but only one. The second is the people inside your team, right, who are, stakeholders in it, and they have experiences at the current company or previous companies with some of these vendors. That's one. And then the third is, I think many highlight, I agree, the peers. When I said, I'm not sure about this company, I'm going to ask my other CISO peers, have they dealt with them before and used it? And it's the combination of the three, I think, really makes some great decisions.
It's all data points, right? All data points. Go ahead, Bradley.
I also wanted to say, their brand matters at least a little, because you still have to communicate this, for instance, to your executive team and your board. And if they've never, ever heard of the company ever before, they're going to ask a lot more questions than if it's a well-known brand name.
So we got one more question here, and I'm going to go ahead and ask this while we're talking about this, because it kind of fits. Is if we're self-funded, not planning on getting investments or to make an exit, but we're relatively small niche product, would it still work to consider us as a vendor? And I mean, I think we've hit on that a little bit. It depends on, is your technology solving a problem for us, right? And do we trust that product, and have we been able to thoroughly test it? Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like what Steve said, it's transparency. If you walk in saying, listen, I'm not going to get any funding, we're doing well, I came out of the gate, I came out of A200 and already have a lot of support, and my plan is just this. If this is a lifestyle company and I'm a $50 million company, that's fine. I'm not looking to exit any other way. Great. Now I know. Yeah, no problem at all.
Anybody else got anything quick, Steve?
Yes, I'm going to do the same thing here. One more kind of tangential view that I think is really, really important is, historically, we would buy products with an expectation it would be in the ground for 3 to 5 years, even longer. Okay. That also is called into question. It wasn't unusual for me at Levi's to buy a product knowing I would only have it in the ground for 18 months. I would buy a product for 3 years because I had to, because of the procurement process, but be throwing it away in 18 months because my threat vectors changed or my business requirements changed. So I'm not afraid to throw away those investments, even if it's some write-off, because my job is to protect the company, not just get maximum efficiency out of some technology that I've bought. And we have lots of technology on the shelf to show that. So when you're young and coming in, again, the CISO procurement process, our decision-making has undergone some substantial changes in the last 3 years. that puts you in a better position that you might otherwise think.
Bradley, David, anything on that?
Nothing additional to add. I think Steve was a great kind of tangent and kind of summary there.
So we had about 10 minutes left. I had two more topics I wanted to talk about, and one of them I think I'll save one to the end here. But I think we've all talked around our procurement process. We've talked about the onboarding process. We've talked about how we look at new technology. So all of these new companies, well, it doesn't matter, all these companies are trying to sell us a product. And what do they need to understand from their point of view when they're an unbudgeted item that we're interested in taking an early peek at, but it doesn't necessarily, we don't have the budget for it. What does that process look like, and how long would it take you to get new budget? The effort level that goes into that they need to understand, and the questions that they need to understand if you're looking at an unbudgeted item. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I can start in that. So the process is the same, right? As I described, we're going to kind of get into it now. Sometimes, depending on the salesperson, they may have to, do you have budget for this? No, I'm not going to play, which goes back to what we were talking about before with reputation. And it's like, just because I may want to play with it and see it, I may tell my friends about it and say it's great, and you may miss an opportunity for a good referral in that sense, just because I may be a year out from getting the budget. But then the short answer for it is, depending on how well it succeeds in its pilot, it might be something that we may speed up or move or change priorities, like what Steve said. I really like that example. And now things are easier because it's all API based to swap things out, because I'm not like actually ripping stuff out, and it's not like doing an open heart surgery. You're pretty much, changing a bunch of service accounts and adding some APIs, and there you go. So, which is great, but also more of a risk to you to make sure that you keep getting better. And we may reset priorities to get the budget in if it's something that really excels.
All right. Anybody else got anything they want to add? I know Steve does. I can see him.
I will, before Steve.
Go ahead, David.
Before Steve will trump me. I think there's an element is, Rick, kind of hinted a little bit, is when it's an unbudgeted item, it's got to be viral. It's got to be so compelling, right? And so easy to do. If it's really hard and very difficult to show its value, get it implemented, it's going to be tough when it's an unbudgeted item. But versus it's got clear value, in 5 minutes, people can get value from it and get it implemented, then you got a shot at it, right? And that's just another angle to think about these things.
Go ahead, Steve. Or go ahead, Bradley, before Steve. I think Steve's chomping at the bit here.
Okay. I'll be quick. I'd say unless it's in response to some type of unplanned issue that we've had that has elevated a risk that I didn't realize was as high as it was, the process to go through a request for unbudgeted spend is orders of magnitude more difficult than just putting it in the budget for next year and planning for that implementation later on. I'm going to go that way unless it's very compelling.
Yeah. Steve?
Yeah. So I would summarize there's three things. There's three reasons why we would pull this trigger. Okay. Honestly, first is we have a certain amount of discretionary funding. Okay. It's candy store money. So if we see something and it's $15,000 or $20,000, oftentimes I can put that on, kind of the corporate credit card. So if you're in that range, you might be in my discretionary funds because you're eye candy. Okay. But that's few and far between. I'm going to get you a POC. Okay. The second case is end of quarter or end of year, when I have these one-time opportunities that I didn't spend the money on something I was planning to spend it on, and it's use it or lose it. So what I'm going to do is accelerate something I was planning to do later in the budget, and it comes in early. So it's kind of an early bird for the vendor, but it's me being very cost effective and simply understanding some of my internal processes. And all of us generally know sometimes at the end of the quarter, oftentimes towards the end of the year, we have these one-time opportunities to do sweeps. And so that's where you're in the queue and all of a sudden you get accelerated. Okay. And the third one is kind of what Bradley indicated, is I have an incident and now my ass is on the line. and I've got to demonstrate that I'm going to do something to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and money flows during accidents. Okay. So I may at that point either accelerate or bring in something that was never on the radar screen, but I have to uniquely address a particular circumstance and an incident that I wasn't doing. Okay. An example for all of us I would share was when I was at Levi Strauss, right? Our CEO took a position on gun control. Okay. Now I guarantee you, you do that, you piss off 150% of the population. Okay. We did not have strong social media monitoring at this point, even though we're a big brand. That immediately created a situation where what do we do to put a protection envelope around that company? And now we had to go in and simply say that was not on our radar screen as a risk. You now made it. I need some emergency funding to be able to do this to account for the fact that the threats are now coming in. That's an example.
Yeah. So I want to put one more thing on that. We got 5 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Just because it's in the news doesn't mean I've got the problem. So please do not inundate me with, hey, I know you've seen X got this. Please buy our product because it solves that problem. You need to have that relationship and that trust with us and understand whether that's a problem for us or not. Don't just blast me with email or LinkedIn messages going, the latest, greatest fire that just hit has got my problem, right? So
Yeah, ambulance chasing.
Yeah, that's
ambulance chasing drives us all crazy. So the last thing I want to bring up, and I know we may run over on this, but I think we've all talked about it. It's a trust relationship with these partnerships we've been working on. How detrimental is it to the process? Because these are long sales cycles, right? These are unless something is absolutely on fire and we put it out, your product puts it out for us, like we just talked about cycles for us in our business, right? How detrimental is it to that relationship if the person who is leading that from a sales side is no longer part of the group, no longer part of the company? They've been pulled, insert new person who's going to step in and try to take over. What does that do to the cycle? And David, I'm going to let you go first on this one.
Sure. I'll try to be like Rick. It's like, it depends. But I think an element is, I do think that comes in from time to time, right? And I think that you want that long, especially for new companies, like you want to build that trust. You want that long-term relationship and trust, because we are human to a degree. But sometimes it depends based on the scope and impact on the product, of the risk you may be taking, no pun intended, with that. So I think it's long-term relationships and understanding, the mutual understanding the customer is very, very important in building that bond over time.
Yeah, and it's not just the salesperson, but like the sales engineer, could be, there's other people involved. So I will say the thing that does kind of like, you don't want to frustrate us. And that one thing was like, hey, this is great. Touch back with me in a couple of months because I think we'll be ready to talk at that point. And the person goes back and they say, okay, great. And they respect it. But then they go back and then their director's like, wait a minute. They said to give to, no. Let me send an email to them. And they escalate, they override what the salesperson said, who knows you have a relationship with. And they say, oh, well, that won't work. I'll send a thing to them, or I'll have my VP send a thing to them. And then they start hounding you that way because they're not respecting what you told the salesperson to do. That is something that's more of a detriment, is when somebody above them starts detrimenting. So I actually coach them and say, listen, make sure you tell your director and your VP, don't feel like it's been long enough and text me in 2 weeks because I'm a big company. Like I said, call back in 2 to 3 months, do that.
Bradley?
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that sometimes it's kind of the sales engineer or the implementation engineer that's far more impactful than the salesperson.
Steve?
I got nothing. You guys nailed it.
I couldn't agree more. And I think I probably should have prefaced that with the sales team, right? It's the relationship with that initial sales team. It's not just the salesperson. So, well, guys, I think we're right on the money here at 3 o'clock. I think we've had some great pieces of information here. I think we've heard, ask the questions about the procurement cycle, ask the questions about where my level of approval is and who I'm going to have to go to depending on this. Be transparent. Don't ever lie to me. Make sure that what you've told me your product can do, it can do. And understand that we're going to have to go through pretty much the same process, whether it's the best product and the number one thing on the market, or whether we're just kind of toying with it a little bit to see if it's the right fit for us. Anything, Val, anything you'd like to add?
No, I just want to thank everyone. This was an amazing session. Thanks so much for taking 60 minutes at this point of your very valuable time. Really appreciate it. Also, I have to let you know I got great feedback. Some of it's public, as you can see, but from the few people that joined, obviously, I wish more people had joined. But we're going to share the recording so everybody can get this valuable information. And as you can see, Brandon mentioned it was an amazing session, and I got a separate note from somebody else who said this was the best webinar they attended in the last 2 years by far. So that's great. That's a great testament to the information and knowledge you provided, guys. So thanks so much again for the time, and until the next time. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you everyone for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.